I'm your host, Tommy. Actually, listen to the Inside Carolina podcast, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. I'm the host of this one, but I got a lot of special people with me. If you're listening on iTunes, subscribe, rate us, of course, subscribe to iTunes, Spotify, and all that. Give us a rating, 5-star, 1-star, whatever. Tell us what you want to hear, what we're not doing, what we are doing. It helps us with the algorithms to get you to see Inside Carolina podcast early in the search process on YouTube. Click on subscribe to Inside Carolina's page. You get to see a lot of our faces. You get to see a ton of content that the Inside Carolina team puts out. And always shop JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Season prediction show. We've done this every year. And I think it's this group that's done it the last couple of years. So I put it off because I wasn't going to record a podcast and then the season not happen. So I've probably jinxed it fully. We're recording this on Wednesday night. You're listening on Friday going into the Labor Day weekend. I'm going to just look at my screen. I've got Taylor to my left on my screen, so I'm coming to Taylor first. No disrespect to Jason Staples, Greg Barnes, and, of course, El Presidente, Buck Sanders. But Taylor, Carolina opens September 12th against Syracuse in raucous Kenan Stadium. The cutouts, the piped-in music, it's going to be wild. The cues come in. Let's start the ball rolling. Let's get our predictions. Let's start from the top, Taylor. Syracuse and the Orange.
It's an honor to start it. I guess we're going youngest first here, or maybe best looking. I don't know. Whichever way we're doing it, I think I'm getting it started.
Wow.
That is definitely youngest.
But to start it off, I would have to say North Carolina is going to win this one in pretty convincing fashion. I think all reports out of Syracuse, you have players who aren't showing up, whether it's with everything going on with the pandemic. They've had just practices having to get canceled because the team is refusing to go out there because of just not liking the protocols that Syracuse has in place. So even if the playing fields were level in terms of preparation, I think North Carolina has a huge advantage in this game. So when you factor in, all that's kind of going on in Syracuse, I just don't see any chance for the Orange to pull off this upset. It's at like 20.5 points right now, and I think that spread is just going to keep climbing.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I'm not agreeing with what you talked about before you started talking about the Syracuse game. I mean, that is just ultimate disrespect. So I'm going to Buck Sanders. And, Buck, I don't like Taylor talking about being the youngest and the best looking, but let's get on track. Syracuse and Carolina.
Tommy, are you challenging that statement that
I am not. Well, I saw, was it Baden that talked about Taylor's curls? He's got fresh curls going on. I mean, I was offended. Baden's my guy, Buck. What in the world?
Well, he's definitely got you whooped in the curls department, Tommy.
Yeah. I got the Jason Staples look going on.
Yeah. So I'm next on the Syracuse issue.
You're next on. I'm bouncing around. I'm going from youngest to oldest.
Okay. North Carolina's favored by about 3 touchdowns. I really don't see Syracuse being a threat. Good opening game for North Carolina. Probably get to play a lot of players. So not much more to say about it than that. They still have 85 scholarship players, I suppose, but other than that, it should be a mismatch in the opener.
Danny DeVito, Greg Barnes, torched Carolina a couple of years ago, did he not? And he's kind of.
It was Danny, but yeah.
Excuse me. You know who I'm talking about. The quarterback named DeVito. But he's kind of backslid a little bit since then. Syracuse got any chance coming to Kenan Stadium?
I really don't think so. DeVito did have a good last year as Tommy DeVito. He struggled at times, inconsistency. He came in and played very well. But the reason North Carolina won that game up there was because Dungy got hurt and DeVito came in and made some big plays down the field. But he did struggle a little bit last year. And there's some questions about what running backs are actually going to have available. I do think matchups matter. And with this being the first game of the year, I mean, you've got a first-time defense coordinator in Tony White coming from Arizona State where he wasn't exactly in charge of the show and had some experiences with Rocky Long and the the 3-3-5 that he ran. Where was that? San Diego State, I guess. So I think when you're trying to kind of rebuild a defense, the last thing you want to face is Sam Howell and a pair of 1,000-yard receivers and Javonte Williams and Michael Carter and Phil Longo in his second year. That's just a nightmare scenario. So I think Syracuse may be better as the year gets along, but I think as a first game, this is worst case for Dino and best case for UNC.
Yeah, how do I miss his first name? I mean, he's got the best first name of the season, Tommy DeVito.
Danny DeVito is a great actor.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him on the football field, that's for sure.
I insist that when we do our preview episode that we call him Danny DeVito through the entire episode.
I promise you that I will do it at least 3 times. So
there we go.
If any Syracuse fan is listening, I apologize. My email is greg@InsideCarolina.
If we don't call him Danny DeVito through that episode, then I'm gonna boycott the pregame for Charlotte now.
Oh, this is going to be a fun show. Jason, I assume you agree with everybody. Carolina goes 1-0 on the season.
I think they'll go 1-0. I'm a little bit less optimistic about the, Syracuse has no chance. Openers are funny. Openers are weird things, and sometimes you get some turnovers or just different things that happen because openers tend to be sloppy football. And given no spring, given the weird conditions that we've seen over the past few weeks, openers are probably even more sort of up in the air than usual. That said, I think North Carolina is a lot more talented. And, if I had to pick this game, I'd say, Carolina by 20. So I'm comfortable saying it's a win, but I don't want to give the impression that, Syracuse is just terrible and there's no chance. No, there's a chance. I think Carolina should win the game.
Carolina goes 1-0 across the board. I agree with everybody. Charlotte comes to town on the 19th. We're not going to spend too much time on this. Props to Charlotte for taking the game. Everybody agree that Carolina is going to win this one quite comfortably. I'll say aye.
Aye.
Is Ditka full size?
Yeah.
Bye week. Good time for a bye week. Let me ask Greg this serious question. Is this too early for a bye week, or given the nature of the beast that is 2020, is it a good time for Carolina to get that bye week at this point?
Yeah, I think best case scenario for 2020 is you have a bye week after every game, right? But yeah, I think the schedule sets up perfect for UNC. You get a manageable ACC game as an opener. You get a non-conference opponent against Charlotte that you should win. You get 2 opportunities there to get a lot of guys reps, and then you get a bye week to kind of get your feet back under you. So I think it sets up well, and the fact that you have 2 bye weeks I think helps. But being able to kind of gather your thoughts and look at who actually was able to contribute is key for this coaching staff so early in the year.
But at Boston College on October 3rd, I can't think of a better time if you've got to go to Boston College to be early in the season, because those late season games up there in that part of the country, pretty cold, pretty nasty weather, but Carolina gets them early in the season. Your thoughts on that one?
Well, you're right about it getting cold up there. Greg Barnes and I spent some time on a real cold time in Boston College a few years back, especially since he's always the last one to leave the press box. So it was really cold when we got out. I've got this as a win. If you look at S&P Plus, UNC should be favored by about 18 points. FPI has them winning at a nearly 70% clip over Boston College probability. So we don't know what we're going to get to see with Boston College. They got a new coach, new system, a lot going on. So as Mac Brown, I think, may have said, there's going to be a lot of game planning in the first quarter of that game. So you never know. As Jason alluded to before, it's always possible. There's, stuff happens. But if it goes according to chalk, North Carolina should pick up their 3rd win of the season at Boston College.
Jason, do you agree?
I do agree. I think I'm actually in a lot of ways more comfortable with this one than I am with the Syracuse game because first of all, third game in, you've gotten a chance to fix some things. So third game, the more talented team is going to win more often than what you're going to see with those week one situations with this weird week one. So I think North Carolina is a lot better, just has better talent. And this is year one for Hafley at Boston College. And if there was a year not to be a year one college football coach, it's this year. You don't get it. You didn't get a chance to do spring football. You didn't get a chance to do full on off season conditioning the way that you want. All of that stuff that helps you set set the tone of your program to establish the culture the way that you want it and to install your systems and all that stuff's out the window. And so if you're a first year coach, you're probably going to be a win or two worse this year than you would have been otherwise. And they're a first year they've got a first year coach, and their defensive talent has precipitously dropped the last 3 or 4 years. You go back to when they had Don Brown as a coordinator, and especially with the guys that he recruited, they were one of the best 2 or 3 defensive teams in the conference year in, year out. The year he left, they dropped off by like 10, 12 spots. The year after that, they dropped by like another 20. Last year, they were like 108th in the conference or in the country in defense. And I don't think they're going to be bouncing back from that anytime soon. I didn't see a ton of talent there. So I think this is a game that, frankly, I would expect to see some backups in the fourth quarter.
Vip at BC. Carolina goes 3-0.
Yeah, for sure. I think this game has a lot of trade-offs with it moving up in the schedule. I think the negative side of it is that you don't have a full season of games to kind of prepare and look at what these new coaches are going to do. But at the same time, they're not going to have a chance really to figure out who they are in just 2 games. They have a new transfer quarterback, so you get the chance to play them early. Like Jason mentioned, no spring football. It's going to be hard for them to kind of be in a groove to contend with a team like North Carolina, who's supposed to be a top 25 team. And then moving this game up in the schedule, you get the first week of October, I'm pretty sure October 3rd. So weather shouldn't be a factor. I know that was one of my concerns when I saw that game late in the schedule in November, I think, at first. So it should be a great day in Boston, and I think UNC comes out of it 3-0.
Greg, we talked about a little bit off air, home field advantage, and I want to get your take on this Boston College game and then move on to the next game on the schedule. But at Boston College, like we've said, like Taylor just mentioned, I've always thought that was a tough ask for most teams because I've always thought Boston College was a pretty good team, very underrated. Whether it's in my mind or not, I don't know. They've always been pretty good, but Carolina gets them in October. It's going to be beautiful up there, and there's no other. Their home field advantage has always been the weather. They're not going to get that against North Carolina, I don't think.
No, I'm actually going to throw a grenade in here. I've got this as North Carolina's first loss, and I think everybody made some really good points for sure. Jason talking about Hafley coming in and not being a good situation for first-year coaches. Absolutely, I agree with that. One thing that Hafley can benefit from greatly is the fact that Adazio kind of suffered from the same issue that Tom O'Brien suffered from, and that he was mediocre for a long time. Boston College was never really horrible under Adazio. They were good in spurts, and they've gone to a lot of bowl games in recent years. I mean, they were, 6-7 last year, went to a bowl game. So it's not like he's stepping into a dumpster fire. There's a lot of good pieces there offensively. I think the fact that Phil Jerkovich is a quality quarterback coming from Notre Dame. I know Brian Kelly was really high on him. If Hafley can pull the right buttons, I guess you don't pull buttons, you push buttons, pull the right strings, and utilize a very sound offensive style of play. Hafley is a good defensive coordinator. Maybe he can spark that defense a little bit. They have a long way to go. But again, I think matchup-wise, North Carolina's weakness is going to be along the defensive front. And so Boston College maybe can utilize that to their advantage with it being a road game. There's a lot of these games that are going to be toss-ups that we talk about. And so there's plenty of these that we could pick. 7 times out of 10, would I pick Carolina to win this game? Yes, but I've got to pick some losses along the way. Why not pick this one? Let's say Hafley's a heck of a coach, breaks out his first year. This is a surprise win. Why not? I'll pick UNC losing this one.
That would create quite the stir on the Inside Carolina message boards if Carolina goes up there and loses to Boston College. Any other year, any other situation, I would agree with you. I'm going with Carolina by 10 points in Boston. Greg, stay with you. Carolina gets that home return from Virginia Tech after last year's game that, defies any description up there in Virginia Tech. But this is a game that Carolina's had some success in Kenan Stadium. I believe 2012, the whiteout, they beat them. But Virginia Tech's had Carolina's number aplenty too as well. This game's a little different. Who knows what the fan situation will be in October, but it will not be a rabid Kenan Stadium fan base. Your thoughts on Carolina and the Hokies on October 10th?
Yeah, this is interesting because, as the 2019 season ended, you start looking at what's coming back for all these teams, and you look at Virginia Tech, okay, they've had some recruiting issues, but 2020 they should be really good because they returned pretty much everybody. But then you start kind of following along with some things that are going on in the program. It just seems like Fuente, while he'll have a good year this year, he's really on the downward trend unless something changes dramatically. And so I think while Virginia Tech will be good this year, and I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but a good many people will pick them to win this game. I've got North Carolina winning this. I think North Carolina understands what's at stake. I've got them losing to BC the week before. They're going to be fired up. So I've got Carolina winning this game over the Hokies.
But Virginia Tech is no fan of the Tar Heels and vice versa. I think a lot of people get into the NC State rivalry, even the Duke rivalry. But if I had to pick a rivalry that's a thorn in North Carolina's side, especially in the division, though there's no divisions this year, it's been Virginia Tech. Carolina gets them in Kenan Stadium on October 10th. What saith you?
I don't know if you can hear me.
We got you.
You guys locked up.
Buck Sanders has gone into ether, internet ether. If you can hear me, Buck, I'll come back to you. So I'm going to go to Taylor. We're not editing all this stuff. We'll figure it out. Taylor, Carolina, Virginia Tech. I don't think, NC State's hated, I understand, but the Hokies have a special place in the dark part of North Carolina fans' hearts, I think. And last year even cemented that even further.
Yeah, I think this is a game that Carolina just has to win. You've lost the last 4 to Virginia Tech, kind of like Greg mentioned. Virginia Tech is on the downwards when North Carolina is trending upwards. So I think this is the game where if Carolina wants to take the next step and take the next leap into being a serious contender, Virginia Tech is a team that they're going to have to beat. Last year's game was a classic. I actually like Hendon Hooker a lot. He's a quarterback that I think historically or in recent history at least has given Carolina a lot of problems being a dual threat type of option. But I think just North Carolina has just too much talent on the offensive side of the ball. And now North Carolina isn't deep on the offensive line and the defensive line. So an injury here or there can completely change what this North Carolina team looks like. But North Carolina at its best and Virginia Tech at its best, I think North Carolina wins that game and keeps the perfect season going.
Buck, you're back with us. Carolina and Virginia Tech. The Hokies no fan of the Tar Heels and vice versa. What happens in Kenan on October 10th?
Well, I have this as one of my toss-up games on the schedule. I've got to say who's going to win, who's going to lose for purposes of this podcast. But it's also one of those games where the ESPN FPI and SP Plus don't get along. FPI says that North Carolina's going to lose this game. They only have a 44.3 now. That's close. I mean, they're not saying they're going to lose, but they're predicting it as one of the games. So North Carolina is on the wrong end of the probability scale. The SP Plus has North Carolina winning by a touchdown. So it literally is a toss-up game in a lot of ways. I think the way I come out on this, and it comes back to your point, Tommy, is that I sort of think that North Carolina has this game circled on their list. They are really trying to recruit Virginia hard, particularly the 757. This is a game where, it's really important to them for a lot of reasons, recruiting mainly, where this is a game they're going to circle on the calendar. So I got North Carolina winning a close one here and ready to move on to Florida State when you're ready.
Yep, Jason, Carolina and Virginia Tech. And I'm going to pick Carolina to win this because Mac Brown cannot lose to Virginia Tech if he's going to accomplish what he's trying to do. We've talked about 2021 being the year for North Carolina football, but we've moved that up to 2020. I think Carolina wins this game. I think Carolina has to win this game for Mac Brown's plan. But Jason, your thoughts?
So I really want to sort of combine what everybody has said so far, because I agree that this is a game that Mac and that staff are going to have circled. There's going to be a few extra little things that they'll have in store, because this is a recruiting game for Mac. This is the recruiting game for that DC, Hampton Roads, all those various recruiting areas that they're competing against Virginia Tech for. So that's super important. But at the same point, I think Vip, your point about the lines and some of the, if one guy goes down on either side of the line of scrimmage, things can really change. And Virginia Tech is projecting to be pretty good on the line of scrimmage. And they usually are. They usually have some talent there. And Buck, what you said about this being basically a toss-up, that's kind of what I feel like. Is it's a toss-up game. I think all things being equal, I would pick this as a Carolina game, but I got to pick, and this is going back to what you said the last time, Greg. You got to pick some losses here with so many toss-up games. I feel like this is a game that Carolina should win, in terms of they're probably the better team here by just a little bit. And all things being equal, I'll probably pick them to win it that week. But I'm going to pick them to lose it because I got to give them some losses this year coming in, based on how many games are just so close in the margin of error, and given how much depth is going to matter this year, and some of the lack of depth up front in particular. Virginia Tech's going to be able to run the ball, especially with the quarterback this year. And that's going to be a real hard thing for Carolina, given their defensive line situation and other things. So I'm going to pick Virginia Tech, but with that kind of asterisk that I think this is really a toss-up game.
This is everybody's 4-0 except Jason and Greg got Carolina 3-1. Jason, I'll stick with you. Carolina and Florida State, at Florida State. We talked about first-year coaches. It's been a hell of a journey down there in Tallahassee. Pick this one. I'm going to put you on the spot. You got to pick Carolina and Florida State down there in your area.
This is one I'm really looking forward to seeing, just from the X's and O's side, because you've got some really interesting stuff that's going to happen schematically. And I think this is a strength on strength, weakness on weakness kind of matchup, where I think North Carolina might have the best offense in the ACC this year. I think I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say that there's a good chance they'll have the best offense in the conference this year. And I think Florida State has the most talented defense in the conference. Now they're in a first year with the new staff, so there's going to be some hiccups, I'm sure. But if you go player for player, they're at least as talented as Clemson across the board, with some depth on defense. Now the difference is Clemson is probably the second best offense in the conference, if not the best, and they're also second best defense in the conference, if not the best. So either way, this is going to be Carolina's offense against Florida State's defense. And then Carolina's weakness is the defensive line, and Florida State's weakness is the offensive line. And so you're looking at a matchup that, to me, is very much the kind of toss-up, toss-up game. I think when it comes to toss-ups, you tend to favor the team with the better quarterback. And with this being a first-year coach situation as well, I'm going to pick Carolina to win this game. But again, this is a game where, depending on just how things fall and some depth issues and some other things, and how well Florida State's actually been able to prep in that first year, they're still more talented top to bottom than North Carolina. So, if there's another toss-up loss here, it might be this one. But I'm gonna pick Carolina to win this game.
Greg, you feel the same way?
I agree with everything that Jason said. I was going to make the point that this is a game of matchups, but I do have FSU winning this game. I think the fact that North Carolina's weakness, clearly to me anyway, is the defensive front. And Florida State has struggled a lot offensive line-wise in recent years. So it's really a race to October 17th, right, of which team is able to coach up their offensive line for FSU and defensive line for Carolina by that point in time. When you look at North Carolina's defensive line, for that group to really get better, I really think it's going to take some freshmen stepping up. I think that's just a tough ask. So I'm going to give Florida State a little bit of an edge there. I do agree that Carolina's offense is fantastic. Florida State's will be the same. With it being in Tallahassee, I'm going to give the edge to the Seminoles here.
Interesting.
One thing I do want to add real quick: if Florida State's offensive tackle, if their left tackle goes down, that's their season. We talk about any sort of depth issues here. They have one offensive tackle who's a redshirt freshman. They have one left tackle, and if he goes down, they don't have anybody who can block the left side.
Not good. Carolina at Florida State.
Yeah, I was going to default to Jason just because I know how well he knows both of these teams. So I'm also going to go with Carolina and have the perfect season continue. I think there's a lot of interesting storylines in this game. You have Sam Howell, who was formerly committed to Florida State, going back down there. First time these two teams have played since Weiler's kick. So I bet that's still fresh on some of the Florida State players' minds. And they're looking for revenge just with how kind of disrespectful Weiler was running around on their field, even though it's a new coaching staff. I'm sure they're going to remind
love it.
they're going to remind the guys about that moment. But kind of like Jason had mentioned, in a toss-up for me, I'm just going to default and say Sam Howell, UNC's offense, they're going to find a way to pull it out in Tallahassee and come away with a win.
I agree with that. Toss-up goes to the best quarterback. That's football. Buck, Carolina at FSU. This is one of those ones where this would be a fun road trip if there was a road trip to be made to go to Tallahassee, but maybe that doesn't happen. But Carolina goes down there October 17th. Halfway through the season, Carolina gets Florida State. Your thoughts on the ball game?
Well, this is another one of those toss-up games, and there's two in a row, right? And it'll be interesting to see how the game they played a week before will affect this one. That's another side story, I think, that comes into play. But this is another one where the SP Plus and FPI diverge. The FPI has got Florida State winning, only gives North Carolina a 38.7% probability to win. And SP Plus gives North Carolina a 4.6 point spread in that game. So it's one of those games that could go either way. And I'm going to, yes, it's true. In games that are tight, usually the best quarterback wins. But in this one, I just have the feeling that for whatever reason, Florida State is going to tag North Carolina with their first loss. I think as far as defensively, they may be the best defense, certainly the best defense they've played to this point. That factors into my thinking on it. And, I just don't think North Carolina can get through this entire season unscathed. So that's one of the L's I'm going to put up for North Carolina here. I'm going to miss that trip to Tallahassee. I went several years ago, and there's a bar down there named Bullwinkle's. I'm pretty sure Jason's familiar with. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, everybody knows Bullwinkle's.
Fun trips. Maybe one day we'll get to go back down there. I'm gonna go. I just don't see Carolina losing this game. I don't have them going perfect, but I don't see them losing at Florida State. Sam Howell's just too good. And Jason's point about the left tackle at Florida State, they better wrap him in bubble, and they better put him in a bubble to keep him from getting sick or hurt. So,
and he had off-season shoulder surgery too. So I mean, it's not like you're looking at a guy who had like the full season of of preparation coming in, full off season of preparation. So I mean, it's just there's a lot of little things that have to go right for that team to be in good position to play North Carolina. That said, that defensive line is going to be as good as Florida State's had in a long time, and their secondary is going to be really good. So I mean, it's not going to be an easy win regardless. I'm really interested in watching Mike Norvell against Jay Bateman though, because those guys have coached against each other before. And I've talked to Bateman about coaching against Norvell some as well. And there's a lot of mutual respect between those two guys, that Bateman has some stuff for Norvell, and Norvell, Bateman knows Norvell has some stuff for him. And it's going to be a really fun game to break down after the fact.
Circle at Florida State, October 17th on your schedule, on your calendar. It should be a good one. I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com right fast. We're 5 games through the season, and everybody has one loss. Buck, Greg, and Jason, I believe, have one loss. Carolina, Taylor, and or myself, Taylor, and Buck. No, Buck, you picked them with a loss. Anyway, let me do that read. Johnny T-Shirt and johnnytshirt.com on Franklin Street. They're your friends for Carolina gear. They always send an email. Sign up for the email list. You get their sales, Carolina gear, football gear, basketball gear, anything you need, and 10% off your everyday order if you are a Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Take another short break for the audio folks. Let the national guys pay the bills. We'll be right back. We're back with the Inside Carolina podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Got Greg Barnes, Jason Staples, Taylor Vippolis, Buck Sanders. 2020 season prediction show. We are in the thick of it. And I'm going to start with Buck Sanders on the back half of the schedule. NC State comes into Chapel Hill. I started to treat this game, boys, as the same way I treated the Charlotte game, but I didn't want to do too much disrespect. Buck, Carolina, and State in Keenan. There needs to be fans there. I don't know if there will be. Either way, these teams square off third week of October. Your take on it?
Well, again, I'm going to kind of stay with the chalk here with the FPI and the SP+. North Carolina has a higher probability of beating NC State than anyone on their schedule except for Syracuse and Charlotte. That's how the FPI sees it. The SP Plus has North Carolina winning by 17 points. The one thing that's missing in those data sets, though, that Bill Connolly and the ESPN people put out, there's no data entry for rivalry game. And that's always going to be a factor. NC State will be fired up to play. They always are. I think North Carolina will be pretty fired up as well. So I just think North Carolina's a more talented team. I think NC State's got problems at quarterback. I think their running game will be improved, but I just don't think they can win against UNC this year. So I'm going to mark that down the win column for UNC.
Taylor, Carolina and State. It was ugly last year. I don't see it being much difference.
Yeah, I know Buck is a big data guy, and my projections currently have UNC with about a 99% chance to win this game. I just don't see how NC State has the talent to keep this one competitive. I do like their new offensive coordinator, Tim Beck, who came over from Texas. I think he's a guy where if you do give him some time in Raleigh, he does have a chance to recruit NC State out of a lot of problems. But at the end of the day, Dave Doran is, I think, like 18-35 or something along those lines in conference games. And I think last year was the start of UNC kind of just beating up on NC State every year. I don't know what you could have saw from NC State last year to have like any confidence in that their quarterbacks would turn it around. So I think UNC is going to win this one pretty big. 21-35 is his conference record.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Jason, Carolina and State. I mean, 41-10 last year. State hadn't shown me much. We've talked about on this podcast, there's a lot of local kids on that team that I know and like that probably wouldn't be there but for who the coaches were when they committed. But Carolina and State, October 24th.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be one of those games where Mac is going to do everything in his power to try to top that 41-10 and relish turning the screws on a rival, because he's going to have every opportunity. I think this Carolina team's a lot better than that State team, and I think this is one of those games where it's not a toss-up. This is a game that they should win, and they should hammer NC State. So, yeah.
Greg, my question is this Dave Doran's swan song if
yes,
Carolina blows them out?
Well, Carolina fans like to talk about the 04 Miami game, where if North Carolina loses that game to a top 5 Miami team, Bunning's shown the door, and in comes Steve Spurrier, right? Well, it was well known in NC State circles prior to the UNC-NC State game to close the 2016 season that Carolina wins that game handily. Doran's gone. And what happens? State gets out to 21-zip lead. Carolina can't make the rally. Buck Howard, the pass is just beyond his fingertips on what would have been a big conversion there late in the game. And Doran's hung around. So give him credit for that. But I think we can all agree, we may not think North Carolina is a national title contender this year. However, if you're going to beat this North Carolina team, you better either have a really good defense or a quality offense that can keep that Carolina offense off the field. State has neither. Quarterback is a mess. I agree with Taylor. Beck, you give him some time, he can rebuild that offense. I think there's some good pieces defensively. I know State had a lot of injuries last year on that side of the ball. I don't see this being close. I think this is another smackdown. I don't think North Carolina's happy with how they played in the first half of that game last year. So I think, for me, I've got them coming off a loss anyway down in Tallahassee. I think this could be pretty ugly for the Wolfpack.
I agree. I remember, was it K. Mays' senior year, Carolina beat them 56-20 in Kenan Stadium. I thought they were going to kill Jamie Barnett. It might be a similar type game for NC State. The only question is how many people will be there to see it in person. Let me go to, we got at UVA on Halloween and at Duke on November 7th. Let me group those two together. Taylor, I'll come to you and start with you, these two. These two back-to-back away games, I don't know if I know one better performance than I saw from Bryce Perkins in Kenan Stadium last year, and individual performance. And that was Lamar Jackson in Kenan Stadium a couple of years ago. Perkins was everything. Tell me why Carolina shouldn't march to Charlottesville, beat Virginia, then go to Durham and do the same to Duke over these next 2 weeks in late October, early November.
I think they're going to do just that and win those two games. It felt like Bryce Perkins was at UVA forever, so I know Carolina's probably catching their breath that he's finally out of there. Just knowing what Virginia has at quarterback, I'm pretty sure they just named Brendan Armstrong their guy, but it's hard to pick a guy like that when you have as much talent as Virginia lost in Perkins, in a cornerback like Bryce Hall, to have a lot of confidence in UVA to beat North Carolina. And then when you look at Duke, I do think Cutcliffe is always the coach who's going to get the most out of the talent. And I kind of hate saying that because it's kind of insulting to Duke too, because you're kind of just saying that their players aren't that good or shouldn't be playing at that kind of level. But they have a transfer quarterback in Chase Bryce, and you've seen very limited snaps of him at Clemson. So it's just another case where I think North Carolina, I don't think they're a national title contender, but I think they're about ready, fully healthy, to take that leap into being somebody who can contend for that number 2 spot in the ACC. And if you're going to be that number 2 spot in the ACC and be right behind Clemson, Virginia and Duke are 2 games you can't lose, even if they're on the road.
Yep. Jason, these games, I mean, NC State's a big rivalry. Virginia's a huge rivalry. Duke's a huge rivalry. They're both on the road. I just think Carolina's talent wins out on both of these, but how you see these shaking out?
I think they should win both games, but I think, again, this is one of those places where I got to pick them to lose a game here and there just because of the way that these things work. And this is a discussion that when the odds for the season were posted on the Inside Carolina Tar Pit message board, I made this point to some fans saying, look, if you are 70% favorite in 10 games, or let's say a 60% favorite in 10 games, you're supposed to lose 4 of them. You're a 70% favorite in 10 games, you're supposed to lose 3 of them. So at some point I got to pick a loss here. And so I'm going to pick them to lose at Duke. I think Duke is a team that's a little better equipped to face them this year in terms of they're going to have some good ends, and their defense should be solid. And I do think Chase Bryce is a pretty good quarterback. We got to see him against Syracuse actually pulling that game out by the skin of their teeth when Trevor Lawrence got hurt in his first game as a starter a couple of years ago. But Bryce is, he's a good quarterback, and they'll have some chances. And again, this is one of those situations where it's not necessarily that I actually think that they'll lose to Duke or that they should lose to Duke, but that losses are going to have to come from somewhere, because this is not a team that, and Vip, you talk about them being on the cusp of taking that leap, making that climb into the next tier. And I think they are on that cusp, but I think they're one recruiting class away from being there. And the difference is having that depth on the line of scrimmage where your second group is as good as the first group of the tier 2 teams. And they're just not there, especially on the defensive side. And when you're not reliable and you can't dictate with the defensive line, you're going to lose some games just because of that and because of the lack of depth. So I'm going to go with them to lose against Duke and to beat Virginia, again, just because I have to pick a loss here and there. And so far I've got them losing to Virginia Tech and Duke.
Greg, I'll get you before I jump to Buck. These games are ones that, I mean, Carolina's always beaten Duke, but traditionally at Virginia has always been a struggle. But, I mean, I just don't see it happening this season up there in Charlottesville. Duke's one of those ones where, like Taylor said, and I don't know if it's disrespect to the players or mad respect to Cutcliffe, but Duke's always been pretty good, even though no one expected them or thought they looked good. You know what I mean? I mean, it seems like Duke's always gotten it done. I still can't get over last year's game in Kenan Stadium. I mean, one of the most bizarre games ever. Does Carolina get out of these 2 weeks, Halloween and the week after, up in Charlottesville and in Durham, unscathed?
Unscathed. If we're talking wins and losses, I've got that as a yes. However, we talked about how the season started out well for them. You get Syracuse, you get Charlotte, and you get a bye week. Well, then what happens? You go to BC. You play Virginia Tech, which is a rivalry game now against a good team at home. That's tough. Then you go to Florida State. That's tough. Then you have an emotional game against NC State, because those always are. And then you go to at Virginia and you go to Duke. There's going to be some wear and tear. There's going to be some emotional wear and tear for these players. And this is where we really get to see okay, we know they have the talent. We know there's some question marks. Are they ready to take that next step? Are they ready to win some of these games that everybody expects them to win, but that we know are going to be grudge matches? And I know North Carolina fans get sick and tired of hearing me praise Bronco and Cutcliffe. But while they may not be the best recruiters in terms of getting the high-name kids, they're very good coaches. And I think Duke more so than Virginia this year, I think is going to be an issue because I think they'll be very good defensively. And they'll give Cutcliffe enough opportunity to keep the game close against the Tar Heels. And so I do have North Carolina winning both of these. But I really went back and forth with that BC game and Duke. Because I think North Carolina, that's going to be a challenge. And you can throw Virginia in the mix as well if things go right and Armstrong ends up being a pretty good option there, from where Perkins was last year. So I've got UNC winning both of these, but I think they're going to be very hard-fought games. And I just want to add to what Jason was just saying about making the next step and winning some of these games. Go back and look at Clemson's margin of victory last year. Yes, North Carolina lost by a point, but they won so many games like 45-10 and 52-3 and 52-10. They were just blowing teams out, so their starters didn't have to play but half the game. And Carolina had 9 7-point games, and they were 3-6 in those games. So the separation between teams that have the potential to win 8 or 9 games, which is what I see North Carolina as this year, and an Alabama or a Clemson, that they literally have 7 or 8 guaranteed victories because they are so much better than those next teams. It's a big leap. And I think fans kind of miss that. They think, oh, yeah, we won 6 games last year. We'll win 9 this year. Then we're going to be playing for the national championship. Sam Howell helps, but there's a long, long step from where North Carolina is to where Clemson and Alabama is to get there consistently year after year.
And that's the line of scrimmage. That's where that step is. It's the line of scrimmage because when Clemson walks into the stadium for 8 or 9 games that they play, they are so superior on both lines of scrimmage that the other team can't block them. And then the other team can't get to the quarterback and can't stop the run. You're going to lose 95% of the games that you can't block the other team's defensive line, and you can't get pressure on their quarterback or stop the. I mean it's a game. That's over. And North Carolina is not quite there. I think 1 or 2 more recruiting cycles with what they're doing up front, especially on the defensive side, they're going to be right in that mix because they're starting to get those players and they're going to be there to be able to have that kind of talent edge against all but, say, the Clemsons and the Florida States and maybe the Miamis in this conference. And that's where all of a sudden you say, okay, well, I can write in 6-7 wins right there. You do well on the other 3 or 4 that really matter, and all of a sudden you have a good season. You're 10, 11 wins before you've blinked. That's where you got to be. And I think you said it exactly right, Greg.
Greg, it's like scratch golfer to a PGA professional. It's a big league.
Good comparison.
It's like a 5 handicap to a scratch golfer. I mean, There's not that much space, but it is a lot of work to get there.
Yep. Buck, Carolina at Virginia, at Duke. You're old school like me. These are 2 huge rivalry games in the ether of Carolina football. But how do you see these 2 playing out?
Well, again, this is a game that's important for recruiting purposes. You're going to Virginia, you're playing in Charlottesville, and there's no question that Mack Brown wants to make what recruits are available in Virginia that he wants. And getting Tony Grimes was huge. He wants to keep that train moving if he can and accelerate it. So this is another game I think that they'll be pretty pumped up for, even though they've just played NC State the week before. Here's another point to think about. If UNC beats Virginia, it will be the first time in Mack Brown's career he's ever beat them in Charlottesville. It would be his very first win in Charlottesville. So I'm pretty sure he feels like that's some unfinished business going on there as well. Now, I know you're on pins and needles waiting for what the S&P Plus and the FBI have to say about all this. But the S&P Plus has North Carolina winning by about 10. a little over 10, and they've got them beating Duke by 19. So that's what the numbers are telling, the number crunchers. So I'm going to pick both of them to win. They have a over 70% probability of winning in both of those games. And I want to recircle back to something Jason said about win shares and adding things up. And you got to pick some losses in there, because even if you're favored by 80% in all 10 games, that probably means you're going to lose 2 or 3. Well, the reverse of that is just an alternative point of view. Alabama is favored by at least 9.5 points in 9 out of the 10 games they're playing this year. And they're, by the win share totals on SP Plus, they're supposed to lose 2 games. Now, it doesn't always work that way. Just because your win shares say you should win 7 games or 8 games doesn't mean you're going to. If you're favored by 70% in a lot of games, you may win all those games. And in fact, the odds look in your favor. And so, I'm going to put both of these games down to in North Carolina's win column. And Tommy, if you want me to bring you up to date, since I was the last one in on this, I'm assuming you're going to pick both of them as well.
Yep, I've got them both wins.
Yeah. Well, so far, Jason has got us at 6-2 with losses to Virginia Tech and Duke. I've got us 7-1 with a loss to Florida State, and Greg has UNC at 6-2 with losses to Boston College and Florida State. So,
and I'm going to. You know what, Buck, you've sold me. I'm going to go ahead and flip my Duke pick. I'm going to go ahead and say Carolina beats Duke. So go ahead and make them 7-1 right now. Why not?
Okay. All right.
I actually do. And I actually do think, by the way, that you have a really good point about how this happens up at the top of the curve, because these statistics do tend to lump teams toward the middle, which is what you're going to get, because once you account for injuries and other things, then that does mean that more teams are going to wind up sort of clumping toward the middle, and the teams that stay healthy and have a little more depth are going to end up winning more of those games. So, you can probably guess that it's more likely than not that Alabama ends up with 1 loss than 2, even though the win shares would have them at 2, but that's because of their depth and because of some of those other things that make them a little bit more odds proof than most teams that would have their other advantages in terms of point spread and all of that. Alabama's going to have a few more bullets in the chamber if somebody goes down, that sort of thing. So they're less likely to get that loss. But yeah, I'm going to flip that Duke pick, and I'm going to roll with that and go with Carolina having won that, and this will all sort of work out in the wash.
We can't even get through the podcast and you're changing your daggone stuff. By the end of the season, you're going to be like, I said that. Okay, Wake Forest. Does anybody think Wake Forest beats Carolina?
No.
Can they get Jamie Newman back?
Yeah, Jamie Newman's transferring back.
And Sage Surratt.
Yeah,
Taylor.
They don't have Jamie Newman. They don't have Sage Surratt. But right now, my season is going too perfect for Carolina. And when you factor in everything that everybody's been saying, where if you're favored to win, 70% of games, you're going to get caught up eventually. I think North Carolina is going to get caught up against one of these in-state teams when you're the flagship school of your state and you're playing all these guys who, when you have this target on your back, unless you're a team like Clemson who could just run through teams, I think eventually you're going to get caught up with one of these in-state teams. I think it's been since like 2015 Carolina hasn't lost to an in-state team. So I think that trend is going to continue, and I think it's going to be Wake Forest. I think Carolina has the chance to kind of overlook them. I would have them going into this game at 8-0 with 2 huge games on Notre Dame and Miami. So I could see North Carolina overlooking a team like Wake Forest, and Wake Forest coming in with just nothing to lose playing a team like North Carolina. And then I think that's where upsets can really happen, when you have a team who could be overlooking and a team with nothing to lose on the other side.
Very interesting.
Offense.
Anybody agree? Anybody going to go with Wake Forest beating Carolina? I am not. I do agree with Taylor, though. I think this 3-game span, at UVA, Duke, and Wake, I think Carolina probably gets a loss in there. I'm not picking a loss, but it would not surprise me. But
seriously, Tommy, look, start at October 3rd and work your way down to the Wake game. That's 7 weeks, and I mean it's some tough road trips, a lot of rivalry games. That's going to be tough.
Yeah, it's not Arkansas Murderers Row, the schedule they have, but it only takes a couple injuries or a couple sicknesses or whatever happens for this to turn on its ear. But yeah, the bye week comes at a good time. Buck, I'll start Notre Dame week with you. I guess that's Thanksgiving weekend. That's Thanksgiving Friday, I believe. If Carolina happens to be 7-1, 8-0 going into this game, could this game be as big, given the circumstances, as Florida State was in '97? Could it be? Could it mean that much?
No.
That in terms of meaning, I know. I'm not really sure because both teams were in the top 5 on Judgment Day.
Well, daggone well, if Notre Dame's undefeated, they're going to be ranked. They'll be behind Clemson and Alabama.
True. Now, if if both teams happen to be undefeated at the time, yeah, maybe. But it would take a lot, and plus, one of the things that made Judgment Day was the fans. That Kenan Stadium was never that full before, and I'm not sure it'll be that full again. There was not a seat to be had in that place, and in fact, I did a pretty good side business on selling tickets. Although, face value only, but
I finagled 13.
It's not going to be the
fans.
It's not going to be any hard. Or there may be some fans there, but it's not going to be. They're not going to allow, a full house in Kenan Stadium. So the feel of it won't be the same. Even if in theory, if both of them were ranked in the top 5, it might certainly have a lot of meaning. And Notre Dame also has to play Clemson this year, and if UNC is undefeated and Notre Dame's undefeated, the winner of that game probably goes to the ACC championship game. So there's that. But yeah, and my take on the game is North Carolina's not going to beat Notre Dame. Just to go ahead and give you I'm chalking North Carolina up. Their second loss against Notre Dame. I just think Notre Dame is at this stage a more complete program. Their quarterback is not as good as Hal. They may have some issues with, receivers. They lost some receivers from last year that they're going to have to, replace. And they're not a team that has no flaws, but at the same time, across the depth chart, offensive line, defensive line, up and down the scale, really, they're a more complete team. And so I'm giving North Carolina its second loss in the penultimate game of the regular season.
Jason Staples, Carolina, Notre Dame. Whether Carolina's 6-2, Notre Dame's 7. When does Notre Dame play Clemson? Earlier in the year?
Earlier.
Yep.
November 7th.
Clemson 2 games earlier.
So say Carolina's 6-2, Carolina's 6-2, Notre Dame's 7-1. It's still a huge game for the ACC because it's still basically for that right to play Clemson. Jason, how's it shake out?
This is, I think, the best team on Carolina's schedule. And with what Greg was saying earlier, and I think rightly, about what you need if you're going to beat this Carolina team, I think Notre Dame, by and large, has those things. They match up well on both sides of the ball in terms of the line of scrimmage. They're good enough at the quarterback position, and I think they're going to be able to run the football in this game, and that's a big issue, especially in November. It's in Chapel Hill in November, but it's still November, and you need to be able to run the football. I think they're going to be able to run the football in this game. I think that's the ball game, and I'm going to take Notre Dame to win this game.
Greg, you feel the same way? I mean, we talk a lot about well, I've mentioned it, Notre Dame hype and all that stuff, and if they're undefeated, they're going to be ranked high. But this is a solid ball club this year if everybody stays healthy and all that. Coming to Keenan, it's perfect timing for Carolina, I think, after the bye week, but tough ass for the Tar Heels.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, you say, well, the 2 games before UNC is Clemson, which will probably be the top-ranked team in the country, and then at BC, which is a long-time rivalry game. So maybe that helps, but then you have the bye week stuck in between BC and UNC. I've already gone on my rant about Notre Dame and their inclusion in the ACC race this year. However, if you look at their schedule, legitimately, we have always kind of questioned, should Notre Dame be as ranked as highly as they are? Their name gives them quite the bump. They're going to have to earn it this year. I mean, they've got Florida State, Louisville, at Pitt. I think Pitt's going to be good this year, sneaky good. Clemson. But there's just some tough games that they're going to have to win. And so by the end of the year, if they're still in the mix, it's going to be a really good team, and they're going to be feeling like they're in position to be able to play Clemson again in a rematch in the ACC title game. I do think it's going to be a competitive game. I think it'll be a fun one. I do have Notre Dame winning this game, but I think we'll learn a lot about North Carolina here, because if everything goes the way that we've all kind of suggested it should, this game matters. And this is a big-time game, Thanksgiving weekend. As you said, Tommy, it's a Friday game. Should be a lot of fun. And so we'll really get to see, okay, how good is UNC? What can they do moving forward? I don't think they get over the hump in this game, but it should be a very fun one to watch.
Yep, Taylor, Notre Dame coming to Chapel Hill, not a common occurrence. And when they've come to Chapel Hill, it's usually been, I think 2008 remains my favorite game in Kenan Stadium. But November 27th, you've got Carolina 9-0. No, you've got them 8-1 because you got them losing to Wake. I've got them 9-0 coming to Notre Dame, or Notre Dame coming in. What happens?
Yeah, I've Carolina losing this game and losing back-to-back games. I think, as a lot of people have mentioned, the defensive line is Carolina's biggest question mark, even to a point where it can be considered a weakness right now. And Notre Dame, they're returning all 5 starters on their offensive line. It's something like they're returning over like 110 starts on their offensive line. So that's not something you really want to be hearing when your biggest weakness is your defensive line. And I think Buck mentioned that Book is no Sam Howell, and that's a pretty high bar when you consider Sam Howell as like a top 3 quarterback. But I think Ian Book is probably a top 10 quarterback in college football, and he's more than good enough to win you games. And I think Notre Dame is just a more complete team than North Carolina at this point right now.
Yep, I agree with that. Great point about Ian Book. I've got Carolina losing this one to Notre Dame, even though I hate to say it. I've got too many Notre Dame friends, so they'll be delighted to hear Carolina losing to Notre Dame. Last game of the season, boys, at Miami. And this is a weird one. I don't know what to think about this one. I don't know what to think about Miami's quarterback situation. There's so many different variables. Greg, I'll come to you first. Everybody calls Miami front runners. And so if you catch them when they're down, they're really down. But if Miami's having a good season, is this a bad time for Carolina? Then you're coming off the Notre Dame game. Who knows how good De'Aaron King is? I mean, I don't know what to think about this game at all. I'm going to make my pick after I listen to the 4 of y'all.
I think De'Aaron King is the real deal. I think he's a very good player. Although I am going to channel my inner Mike Ingersoll and say that Miami is already on vacation in December. And so I think North Carolina takes care of business down at Miami Gardens. But I think this will be a competitive game. If Miami somehow gets their crap together and has a good year because they've got plenty of talent. And now that they've got a quarterback, I mean, that was a big issue for them last year, trying to find some stability there in the shotgun. They can compete, and they can be in the mix. And this can be a game potentially for a spot in the ACC title game. Manny Diaz is going to have to prove it to me. I just don't have enough faith in him. So I think by this point of the year, Miami's going to be out of it, and that's going to allow North Carolina to roll to victory in South Florida.
Taylor.
Yeah, this is by far the best time to play Miami, because if they come into this game undefeated, you were going to get that team week one. If they come into this game with 3 or 4 losses, they're going to be checked out. Manny Diaz keeps preaching the new Miami, and they ended the year with losses to FIU, Duke, and Louisiana Tech in the bowl game. Quincy Roche will help.
Embarrassed by Louisiana Tech.
Yeah, they got embarrassed by all 3 of those teams.
Yeah, but that Louisiana Tech game was really bad.
Yeah, and they add Quincy Roche. I do like Derek King. Gregory Rousseau is sitting out because of COVID concerns, and he's just going to train for the NFL draft. And if him and Roche were out there, then that could have been a problem. But you could just focus on one of the guys right now. So I'm assuming that Miami's coming into this game with a couple of losses. I know they didn't avoid Louisville. They didn't avoid Clemson. So it's pretty safe to say they're going to have a few losses, I think. So I think they're going to be checked out, and North Carolina beats them.
Jason Staples at Miami on December 5th. That's a good place to be on December 5th, to be honest with you.
It is, and it is the best time to play Miami. But here's the thing nobody's talking about is if we're in a situation where there's no crowds allowed, or basically everybody's playing with no home field advantage, no fans in the stands or whatever, that's a huge edge for Miami all season, because they are so used to playing without any fans in the stands. That's like home field for them all year. I mean, if Miami allows let's say 10 or 15,000 people for their home games, like a lot of these programs are doing right now, the question is, where are they going to get the other 5 or 10,000 people to come? So, I mean, that you can't underestimate what an advantage this virus is for Miami, in the sense of just them being a team that's so prepared to play in front of nobody. So, and a lot of teams, that'll kind of psych you out because you tap into the energy of the crowd and everything else. Miami doesn't do that. They don't have that luxury, right? So yeah, that's a big edge for Miami in this game, and I think something that really needs to be discussed even more. Needs to be discussed all season, I think, on social media in particular. But in any case, I have a friend who's a scout in the state of Florida who actually went to a Miami practice recently and called me afterwards and said, yeah, this King kid's really, really freaking good. He's like, man, and this is the same guy who called me a couple of years ago and said, dude, Miami does not have a quarterback. And this was with Jaron Williams. And then he's like, Jaron Williams is just not the answer, that they're going to have trouble scoring this year. And it's like, really? They got talent. It's like, yeah, they're off it. And he came out of that practice saying, this team's going to score a lot of points. And the issue that they had is that so far in camp, their offense has been torching their defense. And we know that there's some talent on that Miami defense. So it actually might be true that Miami might be pretty decent this year with De'Aaron King. And a really good quarterback can make a big difference, as North Carolina knows. And you suddenly add a quarterback that is not a Sam Howell, but if he's anywhere in the same, one tier lower than Sam Howell, then you're looking at a Miami team that certainly can contend and can contend for that second or third spot in the conference, and can beat not necessarily should beat, but can beat North Carolina. I'm going to pick this one to be a Miami win at the end of the year, even though this is late year Miami. Everything I've heard so far from the Miami camp has been that their offense is going to be really good. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game between Miami and North Carolina. And the biggest question mark, I think, coming into this, aside from if something goes wrong with Miami, is I like Rhett Lashley a lot as a coordinator, and King is a really good quarterback, but I do wonder whether or not King's going to be able to make it through an entire ACC schedule without getting hurt, because Lashley's going to run him a bunch. And
especially in Lashley's offense.
right. In Lashley's offense, he's going to be running a bunch, and he's going to take some big shots against ACC defenses all year. And that's not a big guy. So, it's going to be a matter of how healthy he can be. If De'Aaron King is not on the field that last week, then, I think North Carolina wins this game comfortably because Miami will have tanked. But if De'Aaron King is still on the field at that point, I think Miami wins this game. And I'm going to just factor on I'm going to count on that being the case. I'm going to mark this down as a Miami win.
Buck Sanders closed the season out in North Carolina at Miami, December the 5th. It's funny to listen to all the Miami discussions. I've always kind of liked them. I mean, their fans are kind of funny when they come to Kenan Stadium. I don't know.
They don't have fans.
There's always at least 3 dudes with the big chain that come to Kenan Stadium that sit right behind us. It's happened every year, ever, since 2004. Buck and Buck missed it last year. They were there last year too. But Buck, how does Carolina fare?
I got this as a win for North Carolina, but in reality, it's a toss-up. It's pretty much a pure toss-up. S&P Plus has North Carolina favored by 2.4 points, and gives them a 64% chance, probability of winning. The FBI does. So both of those markers come out in favor of North Carolina, but they did all of this data during the summer. And at this point, there's going to be 10 games that are going to be played by then. And we're going to obviously know a lot more. But, I'm going to, because it's a toss-up and because both the S&P Plus and FBI lean in UNC's direction, I'm just going to go with the chalk and take UNC. We'll see what happens.
All right, boys. I think I'm going to give my spiel. I'm going to give each of you a minute to close out the season. I'm going to do mine first. I think Carolina goes 9-2, but I've yet to pick Carolina to lose a game, and I'm not quite sure where they lose those. I think the Notre Dame game is an issue, and I think at Florida State. My question to you in your closeout segment here is, does Carolina play for the ACC championship, I guess, on December the 12th against Clemson? Taylor, you can go first.
I think they do. Kind of like I mentioned, I think Carolina is right on the verge of taking that next step into being just a good ACC team to being that number 2 to Clemson. I think there's a huge gap between North Carolina and Clemson, and it's going to be a tough path. But I think when you look at North Carolina, you have a guy like Sam Howell. Your defense is led by a preseason All-American in Chad Surratt. The secondary should be much improved. Your skill positions, Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, 2 backs that could go for 1,000 very easily this year. 3 wide receivers that are really good. A good mix of young talent across the board with guys like Josh Downs, Eugene Asante. I think this Carolina team is going to take that next step this year and go to the ACC championship. I don't think they'll win the ACC championship, but I think they'll be there.
Jason Staples, can Carolina get there on December 12th?
Can they? I think this team has the capacity to get there. Do I think that they're going to be there? No, I don't. I think that this team is going to be probably somewhere between 3rd and 5th in the conference, which is, again, you're talking about a team that won 3 games in 2 years before last year?
5 games in 2 years.
5 games in 2 years. That's right. 5 games in 2 years. 5 games in 2 years prior to last year. So, I mean, I think we need to make sure we pump the brakes a little bit in terms of how much talent is there. And yes, they underachieved the amount of talent that they had because of some issues at quarterback, because of injuries, other issues, for sure. But I think Notre Dame is still in the conference. I think that Florida State team is going to be interesting this year. I don't think that they're really a team that you want to bet on, though. But there are some other teams in this conference that are just too close for me to really feel like they should that they should be expected to be in the conference title game. To me, you've got to favor Clemson and Notre Dame to get there, and Carolina to be somewhere in that 3 to 5 range, which puts them in striking distance to be there right when we all, when Mac Brown, when he took over the roster and he's looking forward, he's saying, that 2021 season, that could really be the year. And I still think that that's really the season to circle. This one, it's possible. I think they're capable, but I don't think it's likely. And so, and there's a difference between possibility and likelihood. And that's where I fall on it.
Greg Barnes.
Yeah, Roy Williams likes to say, the other team has a say too. And that's one thing when we're focused so intently on North Carolina, we give Clemson the credit they deserve, but sometimes we don't give other teams the credit they deserve. And I think if you look at this season, I agree with Jason and Taylor that Clemson's kind of far and away the best team in the conference, especially this year. Can teams beat them? Of course. Is it likely? No. So that puts you in a pot with 14 other teams competing for one spot in the ACC title game. As I said, I think Pitt's going to be sneaky good this year. Louisville's good. Notre Dame's probably the second best team, at least entering the season. Virginia Tech, even though I think that is not trending well, they should be pretty good this year. Miami could be good. So there's a lot of teams that can kind of trip UNC up. And I think when you look at the issues that North Carolina has, they're fantastic at the skill positions, good at linebacker, good in the secondary. They have issues up front on both sides of the ball. They don't have the depth they want on offensive line, and I think they have some serious question marks on the defensive line. You're not going to get away with covering those mistakes and those issues throughout the course of a 11-game season. And so I agree with Jason. I think next year that team could be really, really good and can play for an ACC championship. I don't think they're quite there yet. I think they'll compete for it, and it can happen, but I don't see it happening this year.
Buck Sanders, close us out as you always can.
Well, a lot of good points have been made there by everybody. I think back several years ago, this is probably 10 years ago or more, when I was at an ACC kickoff event. Jason was there, and we were having this conversation about UNC football that year. And he said, well, they can be 4-8 or they can be 8-4. And I think from going through our picks tonight, we've kind of arrived at a conclusion, or at least a guess, that window is a lot narrower. I think probably at worst case, this might be a 7-win, 6 or 7. They're going to win 6 or 7.
Worst case.
Worst case.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's just the margins we're talking about now, much more than some huge gap that, well, if everything goes right, maybe they can win 8 games, or, well, things don't go too right or go south, they'll be 4-8. So I think that's where North Carolina has evolved to so far in Mac Brown 2.0. And I think we're probably in 2021, all that win share probability stuff, Mac Brown got to the point in his tenure, first time around, where he beat everybody he was expected to beat. Now, if there were other teams they're good too, and he lost to some of them. But the teams he was supposed to beat, he beat them. And I think that he's going to get to that point in 2021. I don't think he's quite there in 2020. So we could see the entirely random Greg Barnes prediction of losing at Boston College, which, where did you get that from? And maybe, Taylor's right, and the only teams that UNC will lose to both wear black and gold. Also a fairly random, prediction, I think. So, but those things are possible maybe in 2020. But I think moving forward, we will see, North Carolina is going to beat the teams they're supposed to beat, and they're going to play some teams where neither one is going to have a statistical advantage, and then it's just going to be, the rub of the green in a lot of cases. So I don't think they'll play in the ACC title game this year. I think Notre Dame, that they are not. I wouldn't look at them as North Carolina has no chance against Notre Dame. I think they have a chance to win that game. I just think probably by the end of the year, Notre Dame will be the team that goes to the ACC championship and faces Clemson, which, for my part, I'm almost okay with that because I'm not sure I would look forward to playing Clemson in the ACC championship game this particular year. So we'll see.
And I'm gonna just say one more thing. I'm gonna repeat it one more time. You beat the teams that you're supposed to beat when you're better than those teams by a lot on the line of scrimmage. And when Mac Brown was last in Chapel Hill, those UNC teams were really, really good on the line of scrimmage. When you're running Greg Ellis and that group out there on the defensive line, you had Ebenezer Ekubon, you had all these guys out there that wound up playing 8-10 years in the NFL. When those are the guys that you're running out there on defense on your defensive line, and you've got solid continuity and you're able to block people on the offensive line, you beat the teams you're supposed to beat. It's as simple as that. Good quarterback play, good line of scrimmage. Football's real simple.
Blocking and tackling. Sam Howell, I think, makes a huge difference this season. I agree with everybody, though. I think 1 year away, we've kind of jumped up the 2020 timeline, but I think 2021 is the timeline Mac Brown and his crowd are banking on. It's always been fun. Inside Carolina Prediction Podcast. It's always a long one, so if you're listening to this, we're about done, but I want to say special thanks to Taylor Vippolis, Jason Staples, Greg Barnes, and, of course, Buck Sanders, and a shout-out to John Siegley, our producer. He puts all this stuff together so you can get some coherent content from us. Boys, it's always fun. Subscribe. Let me do this. Subscribe to Inside Carolina on YouTube. Subscribe on iTunes and Spotify and all that stuff, and leave us a rating. Boys, it's always fun. 2020 football season is here.
We're having one.
Yippee-ki-yay.